Hello, hello, and welcome to Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. I'm your host, Amanda, and my amazing fellow frazzled homeschool mom co-host is...
Hello, I'm Meagan.
Hey. So this is our weekly book club episode. And if you're new to the podcast, number one, we'll explain how it works in just a second. And two, you've picked a perfect week to start because we are just starting a new book today.
True story. Your timing is perfect. So here's what you can expect here. Number one, we are unfiltered. Our name is accurate. We show up as ourselves. We don't polish or hide anything. We both love homeschooling. We both love being with our respective children, but that doesn't mean that some days aren't hard AF. And when they are, we'll let you know so that you don't feel like you're all alone on those days.
Yeah, exactly. So number two, we are a secular and progressive space. Progressive, as in, we believe in women's rights and trans rights. We believe that vaccines save lives. We believe Black Lives Matter and DEIA is absolutely essential to any society we want to be a part of. I personally do a lot of the one-on-one vetting for our Facebook community, and you would be shocked at how many people say, I didn't realize progressive meant politics. I don't do politics. And I'm like, yeah, when you put it that way, I guess we do politics. Yeah. So, yeah.
When did including people and making
Right.
allowances for people become political? Right? Like
Exactly.
when
When did basic morals become political? Yeah, I'm not really
Exactly.
sure, but that's where we are.
But we're here. So there you go.
Exactly. So anyway, the point is both secular and progressive do in fact coexist in the homeschooling world. You aren't alone. We have this wonderful community of like-minded homeschoolers and prospective homeschoolers, and it's literally thousands strong. Okay, so not alone. Moving on, today we are kicking off a discussion about Deborah Reber's book. I looked it up on YouTube. I listened to her podcast. I'm pretty sure that's how she says it, but if not, this is not my strong suit, right? I can embrace my weaknesses, and my ability to say people's names, huge weakness. So I'm sorry. But it's her book called Differently Wired. Great book. A lot of people have already read it. We have also already read it, but we're going to revisit. We're pretty excited about that. And because it is called Differently Wired, you can bet your booty that we're going to be talking about equity and inclusion a whole bunch the next few weeks.
Yeah, I so off topic, but I shared in our Facebook group the other day that we went to the theater last week in London, and the equity and inclusion policy in the theater that we went to was off the charts incredible. Like it was just, and it made theater doable for one of my kids. It didn't make it 100% comfortable. Like he wasn't like, here we go again, but it made it doable. And it wouldn't have been without that. And so I just don't understand, like it didn't hurt anyone else. It didn't cost anyone anything. And the people were so like, why? Anyway. Number three, this is indeed a book club. You can read along with us, or you can tune in to hear our digest version of the book. Whatever works for you works for us. We don't judge. If you do want to read along with us, we'll pop a link for the book down in the show notes below.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so today we are going to be talking about the introduction and chapters 1 and 2. This is, like I said, a reread for both of us, but we're excited to be revisiting it a few years on. We read it together in another book club that we were a part of. We are both parents of 2E kids, and if that term is new to you, stay tuned. It won't be new for long. So yeah, let's go ahead and dive in.
Yeah. So I feel like typically we start off our book club episodes with Amanda saying, I have a stupid amount of notes this week. And I feel like this week I might have rivaled.
I think you do have more notes than me. I was going to say you've learned how to use your Kindle better, and I'm back to my old school book multicolored tab. So that's pretty exciting. But yeah,
I made friends with my Kindle this week, which is really exciting. We have moved out of the US, and so I don't have access to bookstores where there's a plethora of books in English anymore. And so I bought a Kindle before we left, and I've been avoiding it like the plague. Every time I turn around, I keep buying the books, even though I have the Kindle, and I'm like, I'll just buy these books, and then I'll use the Kindle. This time I have no choice. I didn't have the book with me, and I couldn't get it. Here we go. But one of my students taught me how to do note taking and highlighting and all sorts of stuff. So I was super pumped about that. So I know, and it's super cute. If you're watching on video, I have a little mushroom cover. So it's really fun. Makes me happy.
All right. So the introduction is called A Differently Wired World. And you actually have the first note. That's unusual.
Yeah, I know. And thank you for fixing my page numbers because the Kindle page numbers were weird. So I don't know what I'm doing. I'm still learning Kindle. Okay, so in the introduction, the page numbers are Roman numerals, page numbers 5 and 6. Amanda tells me if you're in the Kindle version, it's LOC80, whatever that means. So there's a thing here where it's just an anecdote where Deborah Reber's talking about her kiddo coming to dinner, and right away he apologizes for having gotten distracted and not showing up to dinner the first time he was asked to come to dinner. And he apologizes. And it starts her on this quest of thinking, how many times has he had to apologize for who he is and for how he shows up and just naturally in this world, right? And so there's a quote here that says, we live in a world where children who are in some way neurologically atypical, or what I described as differently wired, a term I use to refer to the millions of people with neuro differences such as ADHD, giftedness, autism, learning disorders, and anxiety, as well as those with no formal diagnosis, but who are clearly moving through the world in a unique way, are being told day in and day out that there is something wrong with who they inherently are. And I just like, yes, I mean, these kids are getting these messages, whether we know it or not. And it reminded me of an Apple ad that ran ages ago back in the era of Steve Jobs. And I've actually seen the quote attributed to Steve Jobs, but I don't think it was his, but I can't find the original source. But if you ever want to watch it, especially if you have a differently wired kiddo, head to YouTube and just type in Apple ad, here's to the crazy ones, which is the first line of this poem. And it is this beautiful, beautiful ad that they ran. And it's all of these different thinkers throughout history. And one of my favorites that always sticks with me is Jim Henson is in there with Kermit. And I just think like, you know, we think of the Muppets as the wild success that it is. But could you imagine the first time Jim Henson showed up somewhere with like a sock puppet on his hand and he was like, this is my friend, he's a frog. Like, you know, people must have been like, this guy lost it. He's officially gone. Well, it's like because there was a beginning of that. And it wasn't always the world of Muppets that it is. And so he's definitely one of those people. But the quote itself reads, here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. But the one thing you can't do is ignore them because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. And it just reminded me of that. That's the message that I want my differently wired kiddos to have, not the message that they should be apologizing for who they are. So it seems like a good note to kick off our book club on.
Yeah, it's a nice idea. Nice thought. All right. So I have the next one. It's not nearly so profound. But on Roman numeral page 7, there's just a quote. She says, fueled by a desire to shift the way difference is perceived and experienced by complex kids like Asher, who's her son, and the parents raising them, I founded Tilt Parenting in 2016 to change the conversation surrounding neurodiversity and to help parents find more peace, confidence, and joy along the way. There's a podcast, a community, other stuff. She's got a website with a whole bunch of things going on. And I just wanted to throw that out there. If you don't pick up the book and you're just following along on the podcast, she also has built this community, including her own podcast called Tilt Parenting. And it's a solid resource, whether you're homeschooling or not. A lot of my friends who have kids in traditional brick and mortar school find it a really useful podcast. I've one of my closest friends often sends me links or specific episodes like, how you should listen to this or tune in at minute 20 on this one. You know, I'd love to hear your thoughts kind of thing. So it's a great resource. All right. And then I have the next one on page 8. She says, quote, the truth is dividing us into diagnostic buckets, although helpful when searching for specific tools to address specific challenges, also has the side effect of keeping us separate and secluded. And for me, that was just one of those, I think I probably missed it the first time I read it because I was in a different place in my journey of parenting and figuring all of this stuff out. But I was like, oh, that's so true, right? I think there's a huge amount of value in understanding your specific issue, right? There will be specific challenges that you have because of your specific issue, whatever that is, and being able to look that up and find specific tools. There's a lot to be said for specificity. I can't get it out today, but you know what I'm trying to say. But it's helpful with the big picture, this big picture of, it's hard to find support when you're parenting a differently wired kid. And there's a lot of this, like, well, my kiddo is worse than your kiddo.
Right.
My parenting struggles with my kiddo are harder than yours, and a lot of invalidating. And I'm certain that for the most part, it comes from a place of parents wanting to be validated themselves, wanting someone to say, God, yeah, I think you're really struggling. And, like, I'm sorry that it's so freaking hard right now, because it's not what any of us envisioned. It's not what any of us were like, hey, I'm going to bring a baby home and it's going to be even harder than a normal, like normal parenting. Like, none of us were like, ooh, I hope that's what I get. But at the same time, like, there just isn't, like, just an acceptance of like, mine is really hard and yours is really hard, and they're really hard in different ways, but like, we're all like muddling through and trying to get through. I just wish there was like a bigger understanding of that. And I think that the dividing and the diagnostic buckets and all of that really leads to that division and that lack of understanding in parenting groups and when you're looking for that support.
Yeah, all that to say that both of us are super in favor for specific diagnoses, not the dividing part, but having the information, and for your kids to have information, which we'll talk more about today too. So it's not a reason to not get diagnosed or to drill down, but it does have that side effect.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And then, a lot of this book is really about what parents need to do. I feel like a lot of times when you're first when you first realize that your kid is differently wired, or you think that might be going on, and you're doing all of this research, and so much of it is like geared towards the kids. The books are about the kids, and they're on the cover, and there's a kid on the cover of this one too, but so much of what you're going to get out of this book is about you as the parent need to really change the way you think and deal with a lot of things. So yeah. All right, I have the next one too, but we both have notes on Roman numeral page 9 here in the intro, but we're almost done with the intro. For me, the quote was, "Differently wired lays out a vision for starting with us, parents, and shifting our thinking and actions in a way that will not only change our family dynamic, but allow our children to fully realize their best selves." And I guess I kind of jumped the gun there, but yeah, that idea, like, it's so important. And I'm sure she'll get into it more later on in the book, but so much about helping differently wired kids and help, just that idea of like helping them thrive. So much of it is about fixing us, the parents, right? It's not about fixing the kids. This isn't, like, we don't need to fix the kids. We might need to help the kids in certain ways. We need to fix us and our preconceived ideas and let go of a lot of those expectations.
Which is basically the note that I put for my next comment that I actually,
so I jumped the gun for myself and for you.
That's okay. It just means we're on the same wavelength, right? So also in Roman numeral 9, there's a quote that says, "When these kids have the chance to let their gifts flourish, there is no limit to what is possible." And I feel like so many people are like, yes, I totally get that, but then still fight within themselves to really let the kiddo be themselves. There's still this pressure to conform to societal standards or to learn in a certain way, function in a certain way, socialize in a certain way. And so that was basically my thing, is like, I feel like people say that, but then really struggle to be willing to break down all these barriers and all these what it should look like type things to truly build the world that their kids need. And it's up to us to put that work in.
Yeah. Well, that's that thing, right? There's the two sayings: you can talk the talk, but can you actually walk the talk? Like, and they're not the same, for sure.
Yeah. And it's hard. And then especially if you have friends who are going down a traditional path, and then there's the comparison starts, and it's hard. I get it. It's totally hard. But I feel like if you're going to dive into this world of differently wired, you have to bring all that stuff down, because the world that most of us were raised in was not a world that was built for differently wired brains. And so, yeah, it needs a new world. It needs a completely different setup and system. And you can create that. That's the really cool thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, chapter 1, an unmarked path. Yes. So I liked the fact that page 3 starts off with saying, quote, "When did you first know there was something different going on with your child? If you're like most parents raising an atypical developing child, there probably wasn't a pivotal aha moment neatly wrapped up with classic symptoms and easy to peg label and a clear course of action. After all," but she says a bunch more, and then she says, "After all, aren't all babies difficult? All parents sleep deprived? All new families making it up as they go along?" And I just thought there's so much truth to this, right? And we've talked about this before in other episodes. And I feel like it's especially true for first-time parents. Like you have that first kid and yeah, of course we compare, right? Comparison is the thief of joy, or whatever the saying is. Of course we compare, but also we're like, well, but you don't know the whole story. And we compare both ways, right? If your kid is the one that you're struggling with and you're like, well, but they probably have that too. I'm not in their house at 10 p.m. I don't know how hard they struggle to get their kid to go to sleep at 10 p.m. Or it can be the other way around. And you're thinking like, oh, well, they never talk about the fact that they're up every night at 1 a.m. because their kiddo, or like, oh, their kiddo sleeps through the night. So they have it amazing. Even though, yeah, maybe they're like me. My kiddo slept through the night amazing from a really young age, but was like allergic to naps. And I'm listening to these people talking about how amazing.
We have one that was like that. Yeah. And then I have 2 that were narcoleptic, which I am, I think. And like my oldest, we took away his second nap when he was like 3.5 because he was going to go to preschool. And we were like, you have to. Yeah. I mean, he would literally get up at like 6 a.m. and then nap for like 2.5 hours in the morning and 2.5 hours in the afternoon every day. And then go to bed at like 7:30.
I can't even imagine. I finally got mine napping for 20 minutes, one 20-minute nap at 11 months. And I was so excited that finally at 11 months, he would take a single 20-minute nap that I could like put him down and do something else. And then right on the dot on his second birthday, that was it. Like the naps, like they'd gotten longer, like a little into the 1 mark, they'd gotten longer. And then right at 2, he stopped napping altogether. And I was like, oh, good. That was a very short year.
And then my non-napper has been an insomniac his entire life. So like I have both extremes. And that's the interesting thing about multiples too, right? Is like, not multiples in the twin sense of the word, but, having more than one kid is like, then you're like, oh, I figured this out. And then the next one comes in your relationship. Okay, so I have the next note on page 4, and it is a very succinct note. There's literally just the word intense in one sentence, and I highlighted it. And I think for maybe somebody who doesn't have a different word, like you just can't even fathom the level of intensity sometimes it comes. And I have 3 kids, and they're all twice exceptional kids. And I know what the level of intensity with one is just, and it's just exhausted. I mean, it has been since, I shouldn't say since moment 1 because he was an easy baby, but then, right? And it hasn't stopped. It's just intense. And it's just hard to explain to people. So when I saw that word, I was just like, yes, I get you. I get you, Deborah. I get you. Right?
Yeah.
So if you're dealing with intensity, I feel you. It's intense.
That's the word for it.
Gosh.
All right. So I have the next one on pages 6 and 7. She's just talking about the toddler years and, just that thing, like you go through the baby stage and like good or bad, right? The baby stage, it's really like a year. And then you get into what people kind of consider the toddler years. And you think like, okay, here we go. We've got the toddler years. And then the toddler years are a struggle. And like you're reading all of the books that your pediatrician recommended, and your friends are assuring you that they have similar random problems with the terrible twos or the three-nagers, and they're trying to reassure you that it's like all normal and all of this stuff. And like you just don't know what's going on. The toddler years are so challenging because like some days are amazing and you're like, oh, maybe, like maybe I was just really tired and at the end of my rope that day. And then like you have a string of days that you're like, I'm going to lose my ever loving mind. And you just, you don't know. And it's like, it seems like something is going on, but then maybe you're just worrying about nothing. And people tell you exactly that, right? Like some people make you feel horrible about your child or your parenting. And then the pediatrician is like, no, everything seems fine. It's normal for kids to have tantrums, and like, you're just it's so hard. The toddler years are so freaking hard as the parent of a differently wired kiddo. Though, in fairness, I guess they probably aren't particularly great for the kiddo either, right? Like
Yeah.
they're probably also really struggling with like, why is the world like this way? Why does it feel like I'm constantly on like American Ninja Warrior or whatever, like just trying to get through the day?
Yeah. Well, and I think I've shared it in other episodes, but that was the turning point for us was we were both crying every day. And finally, I just like had this moment where I was like, this isn't working and we need to do something else. And finally, I sat down and I said to him, it seems like you're really struggling to make good choices. Now, this is a profoundly gifted child. So at 3 years old, we can have this conversation, right? So I go, it seems like you're really struggling to make good choices. And I'm wondering if there's something that you're spending a lot of your time thinking about or that you're putting a lot of your energy into that's causing you to feel this way or that's causing you to make poor choices when it comes to your behavior. And immediately he was like, absolutely there is. And like to leaves and it was right. And I was like, oh, like, but it took me asking, and who would come to ask a 3-year-old this question? It literally took me to the point of like being ready to break that I was like, I got to try something else. I mean, I don't know what else to do. Right. And so from that point on, he and I made an arrangement that I would be his partner to support him when he was struggling. And we came up with mantras. And like his mantra was calm and kind. That was like his big thing because he would escalate so quickly and get nasty. And so when I would see the escalation starting, if I said calm and kind, he would know. He'd come for a snuggle and we would talk about whatever it was that was causing him to spiral. But oh my gosh, it was that until we got there, but that's what it was. And, we think of, like, to your point, we think about it from our perspective. And I was crying every single day and my husband would come home from work and I would be like, take him. And my husband was like, and do what? Like, I don't have a natural parenting partner. He still is like, I'm not really quite sure what to do with these humans that we spawned. It's never come naturally to him. And he'd be like, what do you want me to do with them? And I'm like, I don't care. Like, I don't care.
Alive.
Car. Yeah. I don't care if you feed him donuts. I don't care if you take him to the mall. I don't care if you take him to a car dealership and let him touch all the cars and put fingerprints on them. I don't care. Just get him away. I need you to take him away. Like, I just need some space, And so here I am focusing on me and the care of like, well, now I've just kicked my house is so given to my substitute parents who's never here during the day and has no idea how I function. And yeah, so I realized like, oh, he's also spiraling out of control and this is not feeling good for him either. But we need to team up instead of fighting each other because the harder I pushed, the harder he pushed, or the harder I pushed, the harder he pulled. Like it was like one of those Chinese finger traps. And as soon as I was just like, I'm done pushing, immediately it was better. And it has been ever since. I mean, it's not to say it's not intense still. It's still intense as shit. But
I'm just going to say for those of you who are listening and like, I can't have that conversation with my 3-year-old or my 3-year-old conversation did not go that way. There are other options. I know in our home, there was a board book that was something like Calm Down Little Monkey or Little Monkey Calm Down or something like that. And it goes through a little monkey who's having a sensory overload meltdown kind of thing. And it covers like 6 or 7 things that he can do. And it has pictures and words about his calm down strategies. And so that was our key phrase. We didn't have a mantra so much, but it would be, something about like, if I only used little monkey when we really needed to focus, and it kind of jogged his memory of like, we talked about these strategies. Now, which one do you want to implement now? Because me saying, okay, it's time to calm down, like that's not going to work. Like no one in the history of humans has ever been like, oh, you told me to calm down, so I'm going to calm down now.
It feels so much better already.
Yeah, like, of course. I mean, it works so well for adults. Why wouldn't it work for kids? But, so there are other ways that you can set up, whether it's a board book or maybe there are cards. I know there are like SEL cards that you can use. There are an assortment of different ways, but having some kind of something that triggers them, that's kind of a code word that you can say for your kiddo and helps them remember like, oh, I have these skills. What am I going to do? And it takes practice. It's a life skill. So they have to work on it and practice it. But there are lots of ways to address it.
Yeah, because literally the only strategy I had was the one I tried and it worked. So I never explored any others. And it wasn't like I researched it or anything. It literally like was from the universe in a moment of like, I'm about to run away from home. Something told me to do this. It was not a studied approach. Thank you for adding additional options there. Okay, so I have the next note, which is on page 10. And I apologize if my page numbers are off. I'm still getting Kindle acclimated here.
They're pretty good. I double checked most of them, so they're pretty good. I'm on this one or two.
So in the book, she talks about the fact that her kiddo goes to 3 elementary schools before they pull him, a different school every single year, just trying to find some sort of solution that's viable for this kiddo. And so in here, she talks about the fact where she says, I adjusted to what was beginning to feel like my new full-time job, educating Asher's teachers about how to manage his behavior in the classroom and advocating for him when things went south. And I put a note there. I always love that when people are like, how do you find the time to homeschool? Because I'm not doing that. That was that in addition to all the other stuff that goes on with having 3 kids in school, which was permission slips and birthday gifts and teacher parties and color runs and popcorn fundraisers and holy shit, like every day it was something. And carpool line, forget about it. Carpool line and
that's it. I mean, you can drop off and pick up is not 10 minutes of drop off and pick up.
It makes it much, right? I mean, all of this stuff. I'm
volunteering in the classroom.
All this stuff. So if you're not homeschooling, but thinking about it and you're like, how do I take on one more thing? In my experience, trust me when I tell you, homeschooling is far less work than what I was doing to try to make a system that wasn't working work, right? And less stressful because I'm not constantly going against the grain. We're doing something that's working now. It's still work, but it's not as stressful and it's not as time consuming as what I was doing before, which is amazing. Then there was another,
I'm going to say as an only parent, when my kiddo was going to in-person Montessori school, I'm very happy. It was much easier for me, even with the occasional things that I had to do. It was much easier. I had a lot more free time. It was pretty amazing. That said, I wouldn't take it back. I love homeschooling and it's good, but it was easier. But I'll just put that out there.
There you go. I like it.
We're keeping it real here.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So there was another thing here on 10 that I just highlighted because it was so sweet because it reminded me of my own kid. And she says here, from what I could tell, the only thing Asher was learning in school was how to sneak read his Kindle and build a successful side business selling origami Pikachus. When I tell you this is my now 17-year-old to a T, he wasn't sneak reading though. He would just do his work so quickly that the teacher was like, fine, go read all day. So he didn't have to sneak it. He just spent most of his day reading. And that was part of my thought process about homeschooling was like, you could do that. And I don't have to get up at 7 a.m. and pack a lunch and jump through all these hoops that they're having me jump through. Do you remember the rainbow loom craze years ago? The little rubber bands and it came with like the plastic thing. Okay. So Aiden was amazing at those and he made rainbow loom Pikachus. He could do like 3-dimensional shapes out of them and stuff like that. And he was trading them for Pokemon cards at school because he hadn't started playing Pokemon yet. And I was like, I didn't know anything about it. And I was like, that seems like a waste of money for like these cards and whatever, you know? And so I hadn't bought them. And then he was like, well, then I'm going to generate my own income, basically. And then I got Pokemon card. That's where he's 17 and travels all over the world playing Pokemon. So I clearly missed the ship on that one. But I just thought I was like, these two would have been friends if they were in the same environment. It was so sweet. So I liked that one. Okay, on the next page, I have a couple of notes. I'm channeling my inner Amanda today. I have like sequential notes here. On the next page on 11 for me, it says, I came to realize that his IEP wasn't enough, concluding that most mainstream schools just aren't designed to meet the needs of kids who think differently. And I mean, yes, 100%. I mean, I always say like my IEP or his IEP that I went to the meeting for, it wasn't worth the piece of paper it was written on. I mean, it was as useless as it could possibly have been. And part of that was he was in a massive school system. We weren't in a small school system where they could do anything. And they just couldn't. They couldn't customize anything. And so if you're holding on thinking, oh, they'll lose their IEP, unless your kid is getting services like speech or OT through their IEP that you have no other way of getting, 99% of the time you're worth letting go of your IEP, right? If you have questions about it, come talk to us, schedule a coaching session or whatever, come join our Facebook group, come join our Patreon, come to a Q&A, whatever. Let's talk about it. But the IEP is like the Band-Aid to the problem, right? And it's like having, in our case, it was like the kiddo had a severed artery and they put a Band-Aid on it. And it was like, gee, you were great. And it didn't at all. So.
Well, yeah. And especially if you have an IEP, you have that written piece of paper. If you pull your kid out to homeschool because the school just can't actually meet the goals on the IEP, they can't fulfill the IEP the way they're supposed to, the IEP doesn't disappear. It doesn't vanish, right? So if you need to go back to it, like just hold on to that paper, file it away, and it's not useless later on down the road.
Good to know. I left and like burned everything to the ground. So like, I never even both asked that question. So good to know. All right. Then on 11, there's a point here where she talks about her kiddo's anxiety. She says, Asher was perpetually anxious. His poor little fingernails and the skin around them were gnawed into oblivion. Yes, I have that child. Asher deserved more than being shoved into a system that wasn't designed for him, and that by continuing on his path, our actions, or perhaps inaction, would likely lead to even more dysregulation, anxiety, insecurity, bullying, and challenges for our family. Something had to give. And I think I wanted to call this out because I feel like I see a lot of comments in Facebook groups about people being like, I don't think I can homeschool this kid. They're difficult and they're strong-willed and they're this and they're that and they're the other thing. And yeah, they might be. But I don't think that anybody whose kid is in this environment, I don't think you have a true picture of who your kid is because of the environment that they're in. It would be like I can give an example, right? I made a friend years ago. She wasn't a friend at the start. Now she is. Our kids were friends. And I kept trying to like set up play dates or like, do you want to do something? And I was getting nowhere fast. And I was taking it a little personally. And I was like, you don't even know me. Why do you not ever want to hang out or do anything or whatever, right? So fast forward, eventually they were like, hey, do you want to go do this thing together? And I was like, sure. Okay. And so the kids go off and play and we're sitting there talking and come to find out that they've been struggling so hard with a career thing and a this thing and a that thing. And I learned such a powerful lesson from that because I was like, first of all, you're so self-centered.
Yeah, it's
It's like, now I'm like, no, it didn't. Right. And I'm like, so, the version of her that I was getting to, or that I was not getting to know really in the beginning was a struggling version. And then when she was able to iron out some of the things that she was struggling with, she was an entirely different person. And this is a regulated grown up. So imagine your kid being in this environment that's completely not serving them and that's causing them so much stress and so much dysregulation. That's not what you're seeing, isn't your kid. You will have an entirely different child. I'm not saying all that stuff will completely go away, but you at least will have a different version of your kid in some way, shape, or form once you peel back all of that stuff. I refer to school for my oldest kiddo. I always say school was like a crucible for him. And so when we took him out of that high pressure environment, not overnight, we've talked about this, it took over a year, different child. So don't avoid homeschooling because you're thinking, 24/7 with this kid. I struggle for the 2 hours that they're home now. That's not your kid. And they need help. And when you take them out of that environment, you'll see a different version of your kid. So,
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. And I think, well, first off, anxiety is real. Okay, anxiety is real. Nothing I'm about to say is meant to imply that anxiety isn't real. I think a lot of kids who have intense anxiety as younger kids, if they were taken out of the school environment and given time to grow into who they are and to really develop that self-confidence in that, like, yep, I'm different. I march to the beat of my own drum and I'm cool with that, right? And they, especially if you've got a gifted kiddo who's a perfectionist and they learn to deal with some of that and they learn these resilient skills. Once they learn so many of these skills, what appeared to be really intense anxiety in life really melts away in a lot of ways. Now, that doesn't mean anxiety completely goes away. It doesn't mean it's going to stop for every kid, right? But the school environment and all of those things, it really can feed into a problem and make it a much bigger problem than it actually needs to be. And so, you know, knowing that you can step back and address it differently can be pretty huge.
and I mean, that's not rocket science, right? I mean, we moved last year. I shared it all throughout our episodes and the seasons and everything. We were selling, I mean, for all intents and purposes, we had a compound, right? My parents lived with us. We had 5 buildings on our property. It was not an easy property to sell. And then on top of it, we decided to move out of the country and sell everything we owned and all that kind of stuff. The circumstances that I was in, I am a naturally anxious person. I am still anxious today. I take anxiety meds, right? Like none of this is, but you bet your ass I was more anxious then than I am today. The circumstances that you are in, if you're caring for a sick parent or whatever it is, you are more, I mean, the environment that you're in, the life circumstances that you're dealing with, all of that stuff is going to change. And so our kids are no different. If they're in an environment that's not serving them 5 days a week, 7 hours a day, 180 days a year, and then they've got homework on top of it. So even when they're home, they can't fully detach and relax because that connection is always there. And all of their social connections are also tied to that place that causes them anxiety. Holy crap, when does this child's nervous system ever have a chance to come down and relax? Yeah. So it's definitely real. I agree. And yeah, the environment plays a huge, as a very anxious person, situations and environments definitely play a huge role. What do you think? Okay. I'm still going strong here. On 13, I just have a bunch of highlights here. And it's just, if you're in a world that isn't working for you and your kids and all of that, here's some hope. Making the choice to adapt our life to support who Asher is sparked a renaissance in our family. I love that word. And 6 years later, we are continuing to create our new perfect, quote unquote, normal. Instead of being in odds with one another, together, we're mostly in flow. A little while later, she says, because he is able to just be the awesome person he is without being told he's bad or screwing up or doing it wrong, his beautiful qualities such as empathy and compassion and a dogged desire to stand up against inequality are flourishing, which is a huge sign of neurodivergence, FYI. Pure, I'm confident, and it's been the most incredible thing to witness. A little while later, she says, we embraced and accepted who Asher is while exploring alternative ways of being as a family. More than anything, we let go of control of what other people thought of our child or our parenting techniques, of what the future, quote unquote, should look like. We started truly living in the now, noticing the gifts that are here every day. And we've talked about control before. We've talked about it with parenting styles and all kinds of stuff. It's a doozy in the world of parenting.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So side note, we're back from a short break because I had to run and get a converter because we're in Europe and my computer had an American plug. And living in a very neurodivergent household, my 13-year-old left his power converter in a hotel a couple of weeks ago. He and my 17-year-old went up to Birmingham for the weekend to play in a Yu-Gi-Oh tournament. And he came back. His converter did not. So we left the US with the right number of converters. And now we're playing this shuffle where it's like, can I have the thing? Can I have the thing? Can you have neurodivergence at its finest? a lot of things get lost in this household. So we just roll with it. I mean, what am I going to get upset about it for? But my laptop is plugged back in. Okay. So then the next note that I have is, okay, here it says, I'm on page 15. It says, in conversations with parent after parent about raising differently wired children, I've heard about the same challenges: uncertainty about a child's neurodiversity, lack of school fit, tough behavior, families, friends, and educators who don't get it, and difficulty getting the information, resources, and tools we need. The details differ about who our kids are, but the common experiential thread is the same: frustration, confusion, sadness, and a pervasive sense of being overwhelmed. A little while later, she says, the usual parenting approaches simply don't work for us. Every decision about our child involves just a little bit more consideration, stress, and anxiety than what other parents might experience. And that has 1000% been true for me. So if you're in that position, I just wanted to kind of share that and say, number one, you're not alone. And number two, if you're still following, the way your sister raised her kids because she's got amazing kids and whatever, and you're like, this just isn't working, there might be a reason for that. And you're allowed to completely blow up that system and be like, I'm going to do what works for my kids. Not only allowed, but encouraged, right? Chances are it's not going to work. If your relative has neurotypical kids and you do not, it's going to end up being different, or your best friend or whoever it is, right? It's okay. Let them think you're weird. Go for it. Doesn't matter.
Can't imagine a world in which anyone thought I was normal, but that's a whole other conversation. So I finally have a comment. All right. So my note starts on page 16, and we actually have the same one, but I'm going to start because I haven't gotten to talk in a while. So the quote says, according to the latest estimates, approximately 1 in 5 school-aged children is in some way neurologically divergent, meaning that their brains function atypical from what's considered quote unquote normal, right? And first off, she's going to reference this throughout the book. So it's important to know that she's saying 1 in 5 school-age children is differently wired, basically. For me, I thought it was an interesting stat, but I really wish that she would have cited her source. Like I went in the back, she's got some different things that she cited, but none of them appear to be this specifically. So then, of course, I did what I do, and I went and did my own research. It seems like this is based on a study that came out of the UK, but it wasn't completely clear. And that study didn't exactly say 20% either, but it was the closest that I found. What I did find that's a little bit more US specific is that on average, 4% of school-age kiddos are on the spectrum. 14% of public school students receive some type of special education services. 8 to 9% of school-age kids are diagnosed with ADHD, depending on which source you're looking at. And then I actually found a really interesting one that I encourage everyone to go read, just because I was like, it's YouGov US. So it's like YouTube, but it's YouGov, G-O-V, US. And the article was titled Neurodiversity in the US. It's a pretty quick read, but it was super interesting. A lot of it's self-reported numbers, but it was looking at who self-reports as being neurodiverse. And it compares things from like people under the age of 30 compared to people over the age of 65, and people who are on the gender spectrum or identify as LGBTQAI plus versus others, people who don't, and who's self-reporting neurodiversity as far as Republicans versus Democrats, and just all of those kind of things. And I was like, oh, this is such interest. Like, I'm just kind of a nerd with this kind of things. I was like, oh, this is not entirely related, but like a great read. So I'm just sharing it with you.
So very interesting. I like it. Yeah. So in that same section, because I noted the same thing there, in that same section, she talks about the fact that their neurological differences are treated like deficits instead of part of the essential fabric that makes up these creative, complicated, awesome beings. And so my thought is just, if your child is in an environment where their perpetual messaging, whether it's overt or subtle, is that they have a deficit, the very core of who they are is itself a deficit, they need a new environment. Please, 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 please. They need a new environment. Okay, and then not surprisingly, I have the next note. So at the top of 17, in the Kindle format. There's a section here that says, I don't believe there is any one way to be okay or typical or normal in today's world. And she's got normal in quotations. Then in parentheses, she says, and who came up with this definition of normal anyway? Since when is normal what we're striving for? If you are asking yourself these same questions, our second book club that we did on the podcast back in season 1, we did Jonathan Mooney's Normal Sucks. And he's also written a book called The Short Bus. If you're wondering who came up with the idea of normal, he discovers that, right? He goes deep. It's amazing. It's an amazing read. And then not only that, he came on and talked to us about the neurodivergence movement and he's just the cat's pajamas. So we'll link those here in the show notes for this episode, but go check them out. And the book is amazing. Absolutely amazing. A very different tone from this book. It's like one of those you'll laugh, you'll cry kind of books.
Yeah.
But amazing. And then the end of my notes for chapter 1 on that same page says, it's time society stopped looking at our kids' neurodifferences as things that need fixing and instead considered the possibility that today's increasingly large population of atypical children may actually be a modern day evolution. I love that. It's time for our children to be seen and celebrated for who they truly are. It's time for our families to thrive, but to change everything for our kids and for us, we're going to have to throw out the current parenting paradigm. And I absolutely loved the idea of that being a modern day evolution, because we hear these comments that are like, everybody is neurodivergent nowadays. Okay, well, first of all, we're diagnosing and we're realizing more now, especially for females. But then on top of it, maybe there is an evolution. There are signs and indicators that it's hereditary. So yes, it will continue to perpetuate, especially as the population grows. So, but the key message there being that they don't need fixing. There's nothing wrong with these kids. They're amazing. Instead, we as parents, in my opinion, need to focus on providing them with the tools and accommodations that they need to be who they are and to thrive in the world that they live in, as opposed to us trying to change that kiddo to fit into the world that wasn't made for them.
Well, yeah. And not only in our own homes, but like the bigger picture. You know, if you are at home with a kiddo and you know that they need certain tools and accommodations to be able to thrive, like we're the parents that need to be pushing for that to be done at the school play that we want to go to, at the local whatever that we're involved with. These changes, they're not going to happen at some corporate level where they're like, hey, this isn't going to save us any money. Let's do this. We have to be pushing and advocating. And I know that's a hard thing to talk about and think about right now, because with the way the world is literally on fire all around us, it feels like I cannot possibly advocate for one more thing. I can't possibly fight for one more thing. And we get that and we hear that. But I do think that, you know, big picture, you figure it out in your own home, and then you have to extrapolate that out. It's got to go beyond your own home so that we're creating the world that we want for our kids and we want for our grandkids.
Well, and as exhausting as it sounds to go get those accommodations, right? And to do that, like I was saying, we went to the theater last week, right? And I don't get to just show up like every other ticket holder. I have to find the email address for the access team and send an email and go back and forth with them a little bit and all that kind of stuff. But I can put the work in then, or I can put the work in for how long after that show with a super dysregulated kid. It's my pick. And I'd rather, number one, know what the work is going in. The dysregulation part is like a mystery box. Right? I don't really feel like opening that mystery box. But then also I don't want to put my kid through that mystery box. So I know what the setup requires at the beginning, and it takes a little bit of planning and a little bit of forethought, but it's kind of a pre-scheduled routine at that point. And so if I do it, I can prevent the mystery box and a whole lot of issues and stress for my kiddo that he doesn't need to experience. So let's do it. So it's like either way, you're doing work.
Yeah, you are. Though I will say, for anyone who's listening and is like, it's awesome that Meagan had that amazing experience and that it went so well. Like that was not my experience. It doesn't always, you know, like we had talked about, I used the email and I did all of the things I was supposed to for an experience that I went to in the fall. And it went to hell in a handbasket from the very beginning. Right. And I was actually really sick for a solid week afterwards. And that's part of the issue and part of the reason why, like we need to keep going at it, but we also both, Meagan as well, like we understand that like some weeks you don't have the energy for it.
Yeah.
Some weeks it falls apart, and that's the reality of life, right? Like there's not unlimited energy for all of the things that you need to do. It just doesn't. So
we're doing that right now, actually. So I booked yesterday the accommodation for us to go to a world schooling hub in Vienna, and I sent the hostel a thing. FYI, my 13-year-old has a service dog. I have her EU passport and blah, blah, blah. They replied back with, great, no problem. Pets are a 15 euro per night fee. And I replied back with, she's not a pet. She's a service dog. There's a legal distinction. And they replied back with, no problem. Pets are a 15 euro fee. Was like, and so part of me is like, do I just shut up and pay the 15 euro fee? Or do I fight this one to the, because
to make sure they understand, like, this is not a pet. This is,
right.
Like you wouldn't be like, well, your cane is a real inconvenience. So it's going to be 15 euro a day for the cane. And if it's about like an animal fee, like legally, if you're allowed to do that in your country, then, okay, like, because there's probably additional cleaning and things like that will have to be done. My kiddo is quite allergic to pets. I shouldn't say pets. It doesn't matter if it's a service animal or not. He's allergic to it. So I understand like there's extra cleaning that has to be done and things that have to be, like dealt with or managed, but like there's a distinction, right? Like, it's not a pet, it's a service animal. Like, let's make sure, words matter. I say that all the time in my house, words matter.
And so, but I'm doing that. Like, do I have the spoons to fight this to the death with the Austrian hostel, or do I just pay the 15 euro? And so time will tell. We'll see how far I get.
Yeah. All right, we have one more chapter to cover, but before we do that, I did mention in the beginning of the episode, but did you know that we have a Facebook group? If you feel alone as a secular progressive homeschooler, or you are panic-stricken about the state of the world, that dumpster fire we were just talking about right now, and you just need a community of people who truly get it, we have that community. All you have to do is go on Facebook, search Homeschool Moms Unfiltered, then filter for groups, find the one. It should be right at the top. It's going to say Homeschool Moms Unfiltered Secular and Progressive AF. Okay, if it has that extra tag, Secular and Progressive AF, that's our group. Hit the join, answer a few questions, and come join us. We would love to welcome you there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right, friends. So when we started this episode, we have said we were going to cover intro, chapter 1 and chapter 2, and we have gone long, but that's okay because there's a lot to say and it's an amazing book. So what we've decided to do is split this one here, and it's going to be kind of an abrupt, like, end of episode. And then the next one is going to start off a little choppy as well because it was never meant to be done this way. It's all good. We're homeschool parents. We roll with it. So we're going to end here. We hope you have an awesome rest of your day, and we will resume our conversation next week. So come join us.